Nobody has more invested in the NFL draft than bookmakers. And so we're going to have a look and see who they predict is going to be taken with every pick of the 2025 NFL draft. It's the Bookies Mock Draft. What do the odds say will happen on the fantasy first down? I'm Ben Wasley. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to check out what bookmakers think is going to happen in the NFL draft. These guys have more invested than anyone else because they put their money on the line every single year and every single sporting event, really, to predict what's going to happen. And while admittedly, they do have a pretty heavy edge on their betting, we are going to have a look and see what they think is going to happen in this year's draft. I've basically gone through and I've taken odds from as many websites as I could find, tried to work out what made the most sense based on what they are happening, and I've got my predictions for you in a second. If you want to check out what I think, though, and my mock draft has been ranked in the top 12 by Fantasy Pros 3 of the last 4 years for accuracy, you can go to my last video, or you can go to ffdfantasyfootball.com, where you can also check out all of my stuff there. I also wrote an article on it over at football.rasball.com that's coming out in the next day or so. But today, we're talking about what the bookies are thinking. And I had to go through a couple of different things to make this work. While they do have odds on specific players, the first 5 or so picks, after that, you kind of have to go through and look at the odds of where a player is likely to be drafted, what position teams are most likely to draft with their first pick. Plus, I also went through and I looked at the overs and unders on the draft position of each player. For example, if a player's over 18.5 was the most likely outcome, then I had to put them in after the 18th slot, naturally. And if it was under 18.5 that was more likely, I had to put them within the top 18 somewhere. So I tried to lock myself into that and then fit those players into whatever slots made the most sense. The problem is some positions just naturally have very low odds. Nobody is favorite to take a safety, but we do know that the odds makers believe that there will be 2 safeties taken into this draft. That's considered over an 80% chance of happening. The problem is no idea which team are going to take them. Same thing with tight ends. We know that 2 tight ends are going to go in this draft. There's only 1 tight end expected to be taken, or at least 1 team expected to take a tight end. So it's very hard to slot these players in. I've done my best to make it make the most sense, but you might see a couple of situations where a team is likely to take a certain position, but I've got them taking another position because I need somebody to be taking that player. So we'll go through the 32 teams and also look at a couple of players that were surprise exclusions as well. Let's get into it. And first up, there's really no surprises. Cam Ward is heavily favored to be the number 1 pick. The Titans have basically come out and said that they're going to do this. While there has been some talk over the last few months, they might go with a Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter. And while Shedeur Sanders is actually the favorite at one point in time, it's been Cam Ward for weeks. And he is a heavy favorite to go here. They cancelled the private workout with Shedeur Sanders. There is really no good chance of them taking Hunter or Carter. It's going to be Cam Ward. They don't have another quarterback on their roster. This is just plain going to happen. I wouldn't bet my house on it because the odds aren't very good, but it is highly likely to occur. And Travis Hunter's movement has been the big shock of the last 3 to 4 days or so. I think it was around last Friday or Saturday, we started to have reports coming out that Hunter was looking like the likely pick for the Browns. And that's a bit of a surprise because that's been heavily favored towards Abdul Carter for some time now. Carter's more of a natural fit. They need someone opposite Myles Garrett, give him an amazing rush game, but Hunter's going to fit in as well. Why I find this really surprising is that there have been rumors to suggest that the Browns are going to use Hunter as a wide receiver. I don't remember the last time there was a wide receiver taken as a top 2 pick. This is a weird situation. So I don't know if they've just changed their mind when the coaches got involved. Obviously, early on, it's the scouts' opinions, then the coaches get involved and have their say. I think that's a possibility. I do think ultimately it makes more sense as a cornerback, especially at this value, but I don't know. Hunter's the favorite. It's likely to happen here, but don't totally discount Carter because those odds were totally flipped around just a few days ago. The odds that have really changed, though, is with the third pick. It has been expected to be Shedeur Sanders for some time, and it looks like that's not likely to happen. While the Giants are still the most likely team to draft him, he is not likely to go this early. Where are they going to get him? Well, they could trade down, but I think that's very unlikely. Or they could trade up late into the first round or take him early in the second round. I think he's more likely to go late first round to the Giants or the Browns or the Saints. Potentially the Steelers just take him with their pick. And I think the same thing applies to Jackson Dart as well. I think he's more likely to go in that range. I think anywhere after about 20, we're likely to see him go off the board. It's not impossible the Saints take him at 9. And that may be what happens in this draft or maybe not. But the Giants are the favorite team to take him for the exact reason that they do have that early pick in the second round, and they do really need a quarterback because I really don't think Russell Wilson's going to be the guy moving forward for them. So Carter's the favorite with this third pick. If they can get Sanders with their second round pick, that would be fantastic value. I am going on the World Football Show in a couple of days' time, and I know he's been saying for some time that scouts he's been talking to have been saying that Shedeur Sanders just has to come out of the first round of mocks entirely. That's not likely to happen. Now, to be fair, scouts aren't always right about that sort of thing. It's often just their own personal opinion. But I do think that we are going to see a slide for Shedeur Sanders. That is becoming the popular narrative that we're seeing bandied around at the moment. Bookmakers still have him at about around 5-1 sort of situation. So we're talking 20% odds, that sort of idea. With a little bit of vig in there, it's probably a little bit lower than that, closer to 15% odds. But highly unlikely to happen. I think Carter is the number 3 pick with all probability. Certainly Hunter and Carter are going to be 2 and 3. Now, Will Campbell has been growing as the number 4 pick. This is far from a done deal. This could go in a number of directions. Obviously, if Sanders goes in the first few picks, then all of a sudden the Patriots will take one of Carter and Hunter. Obviously, if that doesn't occur, they are expected to go OT. I think Campbell is the favorite specifically for the Patriots. The Patriots have for a while been talking about liking Campbell better than Membu. While Membu's been rising in general with most teams, Charlie Campbell's been saying for some time that Will Campbell is going to be the guy that the Patriots like better and that he probably takes. Despite his shorter arms, Campbell looks like he's going to go in the top 5, and the bookmakers now agree with that, even though Membu was the favorite to be the first O-lineman off the board for some time. Mason Graham is 5th, and he's a heavy favorite to go at number 5 here to the Jaguars. While Membu's also an option, and certainly there's some people talking about that happening, I've certainly seen it mocked in a couple of sharp mocks as well. I do think Graham's the most likely option. I'd Will Johnson here for a while, but he is expected to fall quite a lot. The bookmakers have him going outside the top 10. And who am I to argue with that? At 6, Ashton Genty, a very heavy favorite to go here. This is his odds of literally going to the Raiders. He's surely going to have to go at the 6th spot. I don't see them needing to move up for him. They might go up to 5 just to make sure if they really love him, but I think that's unlikely. I know a couple of people like Walton Charlie have Will Johnson going here, and cornerback certainly is the second most likely outcome. I've also seen Jalon Walker being mocked here, but I think Genty makes way more sense. They definitely need a running back. This is the kind of thing I could just expect them doing, get their Josh Jacobs replacement finally, because their run game was so awful last season. And here's Memboy going at 7 to the Jets. This is far from a hot take. They've been linked with him so many times. This is Bookie's favorite to occur. They're probably going to take an O-lineman here. They've also been linked to Tyler Warren, and I think possibly if Membo isn't here, then Warren's the guy they take, because these are the 2 players that they have been linked with. Not totally out of the realms of possibility. They'll take Sanders if he falls, but I think we're probably going to see Membo here. Outside chance we see Warren. Earlier on, I was mocking them a defensive tackle to put opposite Quinn and Williams there. I do think that kind of makes sense, but the bookies seem to think it's a very low chance of that happening. I wouldn't totally discount it, though. In the 8th spot, Jalon Walker has been rising here for some time. Even though he is an edge rusher, according to the bookmakers, he's being classified as a linebacker, and that's what he's expected to be selected by on the night. And while edge is more likely to occur than linebacker, no team is likely to take a linebacker because not many linebackers get taken in the first round. It will be Jelon Walker, it will be Jahad Campbell, and that's literally it. Campbell's an inside linebacker, Walker's an edge, but he's classified as a linebacker. So the teams most likely to take him are the Panthers and one other team. Will be taking linebackers. So I think that Walker probably goes here. He might even go earlier. The odds of Walker going within the first 8 picks is like 75% according to bookmakers. So expect this to happen. I do think that he probably goes to the Panthers, but he could go elsewhere as well. A lot of mocks have this exact order. This is an order that I've kind of been leaning towards recently since I took Sanders out just in the last day or two. And I believe Mel Kiper came out recently and he had this same top 8 as well. So this is certainly going to become kind of the hot top 8 I think we'll see in a lot of mocks, but that doesn't mean it will necessarily happen. Now, 9 to 16, and Shedeur Sanders going to the Saints is considered the most likely outcome. Now, let's be very clear. It's still unlikely to happen. We're still talking about something that's got a, 30 to 40% chance of happening. So it's not saying it's likely to go to the Saints. It's entirely possible he goes in the 3 spot to the Giants, but it's more likely he falls. And I do think that's the most likely outcome is that he falls. But we have no idea what the Saints are going to do. They have so many needs, and they could do any number of different things here. I think Will Johnson makes sense here, for example. Could easily go D lineman. I could imagine a defensive tackle like a Kenneth Grant potentially. Potentially edge rusher is a real possibility here because they really need some help on the edge. They did bring in players to that position, so I don't think it's likely, but I could certainly see them going edge here. I've seen Jamar Stewart mocked here, for example. I can imagine Micah Williams in this situation, and O-line's also a possibility. So heaps of options, but the odds of Sanders going outside the top 8 is like a 2 in 3 chance. That's at minus 200. So we do expect him to go outside the top 8 somewhere, and this is definitely outside the top 8. He's also heavily likely to be the second QB selected, just where he's selected. That's the question mark. The 10 spot's very interesting. You would think that based on the fact the odds of a running back are best here for the Bears, that I'd be giving them a running back, but there's actually another team later on that's more likely to take a running back, and the odds of 2 running backs, more than 2 running backs, I should say, going in the first round is very, very low. There's really only 2 running backs that really belongs in that first round conversation. That's, of course, Gianti, who we already talked about, and then, of course, Amarian Hampton from UNC. He will go at some point in the first round, probably. But I think that it's unlikely he'll go here. I think this is kind of like a wombo combo situation where Gianti might potentially go at the 10 spot and Hampton might go at the 10 spot. So the odds are relatively high of it happening for that reason. But I think each of them individually is more likely to go elsewhere. So O-line is very similar odds. In fact, some bookmakers actually have O-line as higher. But with all of these ones, I tried to keep it in FanDuel because I wanted to make sure it was American-centric, and a lot of the bookmakers I get are Australian. Banks, odds of being the first O-line, very unlikely, obviously, but I do think he's going to be the third one off the board. He's got the third best odds of being the first O-lineman, which means he's probably most likely to be the third O-lineman off the board. I know that's not exactly how it works, but that's the best justification I have outside the fact that to me he's clearly the third best O-lineman. In fact, I think there's an argument to say he's better than Membu. It's just that after that crazy combine by Membu, Banks has kind of fallen away a little bit. There was some conversation, and I have seen him mocked there, that Banks could potentially go as high as the Jaguars. So not impossible to be the first O-lineman, or at least the second O-lineman off the board. But I've got him going here at 10 to the Bears because I think that's what the odd makers are suggesting. And here's Will Johnson at 11. This doesn't really fit perfectly, but of the teams that have reasonable odds of a cornerback in this kind of region, the San Francisco 49ers are considered the most likely to take a cornerback. But the odds of it happening, I mean, realistically, we're still talking about things that are kind of less than 25%. He's not likely to go here. He's just going to go somewhere in this range. You can see cornerback kind of appearing as the third option for a lot of these teams. So he could go to the Cowboys. He could go to the Dolphins. Potentially could go to the Saints. The Falcons isn't out of the question. I think the Cardinals is a real possibility. I think after that, Johnson will probably have gone, but it is possible he falls further. The odds of him going under 11.5 is what's that? 120, 160 plus 160. So we're talking about a situation that's maybe 40, like 30% kind of chances of happening when you incorporate the VIG. So we're not talking about a likely outcome, but I do think it's possible he goes in this slot. And this is roughly where we're expecting to see him, somewhere in this range. Same thing with Ted McMillan. He is the favorite to be the first wide receiver off the board. Those odds vary depending on the bookmaker, but certainly highly favored to be that first wide receiver off the board. And he's expected to go somewhere in the first 17 picks. And this is certainly the only team within the first 17 picks that has a wide receiver as their most likely outcome. They could easily go O-line, cornerback, defensive back as well. And I personally think they're a good chance of getting a running back as well. They haven't had a running back for some time. It is the sort of Jerry Jones thing to do, is to grab a running back. So I don't know. Jerry's going crazy at this stage of his life. I think dementia's hitting him. Maybe he thinks that it's time for Zeke. And so he goes and drafts a Murray and Hampton here or something along those lines. I don't think that's out of the question. So McMillan is the pick there, and he'll probably be who I mock here in my final mock draft as well. But I could easily see it being a running back, and I've bet on running back here as well. Number 13, this is a bit early for me. I don't think Gray Zabel belongs in this range personally, but there's 3 offensive linemen off the board. Dolphins are considered highly likely to go O-lineman. We're talking about like a 40% chance sort of situation. I don't personally think that's most likely outcome. I actually think safety is a really good chance here. I've been mocking them, Emanwari, or I could see a cornerback going as well, but obviously there is the chance that they decide they really need to protect Tua Tagovailoa. He can't keep getting head knocks, so they're going to need a new quarterback very quickly. So Zabel does kind of make sense here. I could also see them going elsewhere and trying to go up and get Banks, for example, or hopefully bet for them Banks falls to them. Not totally impossible that they'd go someone like a Simmons. I think Tyler Booker makes less sense for them, but he is possible here as well. But Zabel is what the odds suggest. Zabel is the most likely to occur. He's the most likely to be taken in the first round of the players available. There is no over-under on his position, but certainly that he is considered pretty much a first-round lock, which surprises me a lot. Because I didn't have him in my last mock. I considered him. To me, he and Josh Connolly kind of right on the edge of the first round. I think he'll probably end up in my mock somewhere. It's just that at the time I made my last mock a few days ago, that he hadn't quite risen yet, but that's certainly happening now. So this is a little bit early for him, but it could happen. Tyler Warren in the 14 spot. This is the team most likely to take a tight end. We're talking like a 40% chance of that happening. Could definitely see this occurring, assuming that Warren doesn't go to the Jets, which really is most likely other landing spot. I do think the Colts makes the most sense. I have seen him mocked to the Saints and also to the Bears as well. Think of those two, the Bears is more likely to occur, and the odds do suggest that as well. But I can really see him going to the Colts. The Colts have started to sell off their mediocre tight ends. They finally just need to get a guy who's going to do the job, because it's been years since they've had a functional tight end. They need a pass catching option there, because they've got 3 or 4 solid wide receivers and it's still not working for them. So I can imagine them going Warren here, or if he's gone, potentially even Colston Loveland. I think this is a likely spot there. The other option here, Tyler Booker, has been mocked here in plenty of situations. I haven't, but I know a lot of hot mocks that do that. So I can imagine that occurring in this spot as well. Also not totally out of the question that they go linebacker at this spot too. Now, the Falcons, very, very likely to go edge rusher here. I've been talking about that for ages. I mocked him in edge rusher. I mocked him Latu last time around, and I was shocked that Latu didn't go to him. Of course, they took Michael Penix instead, but there's a lot of talk that if they hadn't taken Penix, Latu would have been the pick. Well, maybe they finally get it right here. Having said that, Penix might in the end turn out, but Michael Williams is the guy I've got going in this space. Look, there's been a lot of talk that he could potentially even go ahead of Jelon Walker, but there's also talk that he belongs behind someone like a James Pierce. It really depends on who you talk to, and we don't know what the Falcons are thinking. Williams is kind of 50-50 to go before or after 15.5, so this is kind of like the earliest spot for him. I can't imagine him going earlier. I have mocked him to the Panthers in the 8 spot previously, but I think he's probably more likely to go in this 15, 16, 17, 18 sort of region, I think is where he belongs, because I think we're going to see a lot of edge rushes go off here, Cardinals, Bengals, maybe even below that as well. So Williams belongs in this range to me, but I have seen him mocked a lot lower as well. Linebacker there, that could potentially mean Jelon Walker, but I think it's probably more likely to mean Jahad Campbell, who has been linked to the Falcons too, and don't totally discount a cornerback here as well. Kenneth Grant, someone that I've had mocked a lot higher at times, but a lot of concerns about his ability to rush the quarterback, and he's really just a true nose tackle. Nose tackles do get taken way lower in the draft. I think I think seeing them inside the top 20 is generally a little bit of a surprise. So those concerned about whether he can actually get to the quarterback is why he's dropping a little bit, despite his high quality of play. The Cardinals could either go D-line or O-line or cornerback. All of them are entirely possible. They could go linebacker, but I think personally that's way less likely. I think it's going to be one of those top three. Grant considered highly likely to go somewhere in the first round, but if teams do decide he's a nose tackle, then they are more likely to pass on him, which is why there is more of a chance of him falling out of the first round than someone like a Zabel. So I've gone Grant there, but it could easily be an edge rusher. It could easily be an O-lineman. All of those are possibilities, and this is also a possible landing spot for Will Johnson, or in my most recent mock, Jahdae Barron, who is the second cornerback off the board. And he will be appearing later on, but not yet. The Bengals, given Mike Green, they're considered pretty heavy favorites to go edge here. A lot of talk about Trey Hendrickson potentially being traded away, and that would mean they need to get somebody in the draft to kind of fill that spot. Green's considered a favorite to go somewhere in the first 17 picks. So this is kind of his floor here. I could certainly imagine him going to the Cards or to the Falcons as well. But I do think those odds are a little bit generous because there are a lot of concerns about his personality and character issues, and that's likely to lead to him falling a little bit deeper than most expect. We'll see, though. It only takes one team to fall in love with him and believe that they can fix him. And that, in this case, is the Bengals. I, of course, have the Bengals taking a safety. I've got Emenwari going in this mock. I had him going to the Dolphins in the previous mock, but an O-lineman fell to them. And even if Emenwari goes to the Dolphins, I would have Starks going here. I do think the Bengals probably take a safety, or at least within the top two most likely teams to take a safety. It's just that the bookmakers don't agree. Cornerback's also a possibility here as well, but there's lots of edge rushes that could go here, and I guess an interior defensive lineman's not out of the question as well. I don't think that the Seahawks will take a wide receiver, but I think it's possible. And Golden needs to go somewhere in this range. He's likely to go outside the top 17, but the fact that his lines there should be telling us something. I do think this is the kind of range for him. We'll see him somewhere between kind of 18 and 30. I've slotted him in here because that was the most likely team to take a wide receiver, even though there's really only like a 20% chance of them doing that. That's still better odds than most of the other teams in this region. So Golden going to the Seahawks to replace DK Metcalf. Not really replacing DK Metcalf. He's more replacing Tyler Lockett. But being that sort of speedy, deep threat, I still think they're way more likely to take an O-lineman. I think Tyler Booker makes all the sense in the world here. And if I didn't have to slot Golden in somewhere, I would have slotted Booker in. It's just that Golden is considered a favorite to go somewhere in the first round. In fact, I can't even get odds of him going in the first round. He is plus 150 to be the first wide receiver taken, which means he's the heavy favorite to be the second wide receiver implicitly, ahead of Igbuka, who's like in like the below 10% chance of being that first wide receiver taken. So Golden is considered a chance going way earlier than this as well. And I have also heard a lot of people, Lou Pickney in particular has been talking about how he believes that both McMillan and Golden will fall behind both tight ends and both running backs. And I don't think that's out of the question. I can definitely see that happening as well. Jahad Campbell, I've mocked to the Buccaneers, I think in every mock I've done. Funnily enough, they are not favorites to take a linebacker, but that's because there's so many other spots that Campbell could potentially fall to. And they certainly got the best odds by a mile of taking a linebacker outside the Panthers, of course, who are going to take Jalon Walker, at least in this mock. So Campbell goes here. This is certainly the most likely outcome for Campbell, but it's still unlikely to happen. D-line certainly makes a lot of sense to them as well. I can definitely imagine them taking an edge rusher here. Any of those guys that are taken between 15 and 17 could go to the Buccaneers in this spot. They have said outright that they want to target the front seven of their defense. That's going to happen. It's just which one they take is the real question. Murray and Hampton going to the Broncos. They've got Jaleel McLaughlin and nothing else. That is ugly. So they need to take a running back. They're not favorite to take one here because they could easily take one on day 2 or even day 3 and still make it work. Of course, that didn't work very well with Audrey Hestame, so you'd hope it would happen at least on day 2. But this is a deep running back class, and they don't need to reach. So it's really a question of how much they like Hampton and whether Hampton even falls, because he could easily go to the Cowboys or someone else before them. But I think Hampton makes sense here. His odds of going outside the top 19 is a slight favorite over his odds of going inside the top 19. So this is basically the slot. The 20 slot is probably the most likely area for him to go in. So it makes sense to mock him here. And that's where I've mocked him in my personal mock draft as well. Jackson Dart going at 21. And I'm not saying this is likely to happen because I don't think it is. I've mocked them a D lineman. I don't have Dart going in my first round. But the bookmakers do have the odds of Dart going within the top 24 as being like a 60-something% chance. They believe that there's an even higher probability of 3 QBs or more going in the first round. They've got that as closer to nearly a 75% chance, kind of a 70% chance working into VIG there. So for that reason, I had to put Dart in here somewhere. This is the team most likely to take a quarterback. I think what's way more likely is that a team trades up back into the first round, Browns, Giants, someone like that, and takes Dart there. I just couldn't find any good odds on which team was considered most likely to take him. So maybe next time if I do another one of these, please let me know in the comments if you would like to see that. Then we'll see where Dart falls that time. Colston Loveland, this is a personal favorite of mine, putting Loveland to the Chargers, but they are technically the most likely team to take a tight end. This was the most natural fit according to the bookmakers, but they're probably not going to take Loveland. They're probably going to take a defensive lineman somewhere. But if they don't, Loveland makes a lot of sense. He's considered probably going to go outside the top 19, but that's kind of roughly his line. I think this region from like 19 to 24 is the kind of range that they're expecting, but he could go way later, could go a lot earlier. There's not really that many teams that need to take a tight end this early. A lot of these teams have tight ends, but you can imagine someone taking him. You can imagine the Seahawks taking him here. Their odds of a tight end are pretty good. You can imagine the Broncos doing it. I know they've got Evan Ingram, but no reason to believe that they wouldn't go for someone who's not in his 30s. I guess strictly it's possible to see the Bengals doing it, even though they signed Mike Gesicki. And there's certainly teams after this, like the Rams, that I could see doing it too. So this is the range for Loveland. I've slotted him in here, even though it's unlikely he goes in this exact spot because he's going to go somewhere here. He's likely to go in the first round. The odds of him going in the first round are very high. 23 spot, I've got Derek Harmon. He's turned into one of 4 DTs who are very likely to go in the first round. The fourth is Walter Nolan. Of course, we've already seen the 2 Michigan guys already. Harmon's odds are going in the first round. We're talking like 90% odd. Now, to be fair, we do have to consider that potentially sometimes they do that. They just give very low odds for players they just don't know about. That could be what's happening here. But Harmon has been mocked by a lot of people. I've had him in this region in my last few mocks. I've been giving him to the Vikings, but the Packers are likely to take a D lineman. Cornerback's also a real possibility here. Wouldn't shock me if they go cornerback. I tried to work it in so that it made sense. And I slotted them a cornerback at times, but I needed to get a couple of defensive tackles in there, including Harmon. So that's where I've slotted him in here. Wouldn't surprise me if they go cornerback as well. 24, Nick Emanwari. He needed to go somewhere. The Vikings are considered likely to hit the secondary somewhere. Cornerback is more likely, but safety is a real possibility too. I think Emanwari is going to be gone by now. I think he goes either to the Bengals or to the Dolphins. But if he doesn't, this is a perfect landing spot for him as well. They need to replace Cameron Bynum, who of course moved to the Colts, and we're going to miss his dances. But Harrison Smith is also aging. So this is a real position they need to target. And cornerback in general, their secondary has been awful for a while. They need someone to help out Byron Murphy. He's done a solid job. They just need better depth there as well. So I think cornerback would make sense here. Barron's a possibility, but they don't really need a smaller slot guy. Some people think Barron can play out wide. I'm not so sure, but he would have been the other possibility that I could have worked in here based on the odds available. Josh Simmons at 25, and this makes all the sense in the world. A lot of people talking about the Texans going O-line. They have brought more people in after getting rid of all of their O-line, essentially. I think they need more, and I think this makes perfect sense. I personally have them taking a D lineman at the moment because I think that's also a big need. For some reason, I wrote EL in the graphic there. But O-line is becoming a heavy favorite. Josh Simmons makes sense here. Tyler Booker would also be a possibility, but I think they'd prefer someone who can play tackle because that is a hole. Simmons is likely to go somewhere in the first round, so I've slotted him in here. And here's Jahdae Barron. Even though they're slightly more likely to go O-line, I think cornerback's a real possibility here. I also think tight end's possible too. Not impossible. We see Jahad Campbell go here, but Barron's a real possibility. Even if Barron's gone, you can see them taking like a Maxwell Hairston or something like that. Benjamin Morrison or a Trey Amos is possible. Lots of cornerback options, also lots of O-line options. I think if Tyler Booker's here, for example, they're excited by that possibility. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me at all, and I did that in my last mock. If we see the Vikings take Booker there, they certainly have a reasonably high odds of taking O-lineman, so Booker would slide in there and be their extra guard, giving them incredible O-line for JJ McCarthy. But I've got Barron going at 26. I think he's a perfect fit in this spot. Certainly helps the Rams with their secondary and increases their odds of becoming a Super Bowl team. I know some people have been mocking the quarterback. Mel Kiper did that, for example. That makes no sense to me at all. They're trying to win now. Since when do the Rams do things that involve looking towards the future? They're way more likely to trade away their first round pick than think, oh, let's use one on the future. That's just not what they do. At 27, another case of the Ravens getting a player that has fallen. Shamar Stewart, considered by many a possible top 10 pick. In fact, he is the favorite to be the third defensive lineman off the board. He's the fourth most favorite defensive lineman to be the second defensive lineman off the board. So it's likely to be like Carter, then Mason Graham, and then after that, it's likely to be Michael Williams, and then it's Stewart, based on the odds, because he does have that upside of going very high. But he's also got the floor of totally falling out of the first round. There's a lot of people that are concerned about the fact they haven't really seen him work out properly. There's concerned about, while he has amazing speed, whether he's going to be able to turn the corner. I had him in college fantasy this year, and he got me a whole 1.5 sacks all season. That was not very helpful. So I do think it's entirely possible that we see him fall, but we know the Ravens love taking those upside players who fall. They're likely to take a defensive lineman. This is the perfect fit for them. Going just below them, this is something I've got in my own mock, and he is considered the next most likely to go, kind of close to Pierce, but considered slightly more likely. It's Donovan Ezeuruaku, I should say, out of Boston College. The line's highly likely to draft someone either opposite Aiden Hutchinson or a defensive tackle. I think probably an edge. So Ezeuruaku will go somewhere late in the first round. I think that's likely to happen. This is a spot that makes sense. The Commanders get a real bargain here. They're taking James Pierce Jr. D-line and O-line are the two possibilities here. They could go cornerback, but I think they go one of the lines. Pierce's odds of going the first round is shockingly low here to me. I know that he has a lot of character issues that are going to cause him to fall, and some teams are just plain taking them off boards. But I've also seen reports that suggest some scouts have him as their top edge rusher on their board, full stop. So I think it's hard to believe that it'll fall entirely out of the first round, given how many teams need edge help. I mean, look at these bottom teams here. 5 of the bottom 6 teams have D-line and edge as their most likely position to pick. So how is Pierce going to fall past all of them? Even though some of those guys will take DT, I still think Pierce makes perfect sense in this area. So I think he will probably go somewhere in the first round, and you can get pretty good odds of that, just over 50% chance of that happening. I could imagine him going way higher than this, as high as, say, 15 or something like that. Walter Nolan is someone I've got going a little bit higher than this, but I couldn't find a team that was likely to take a D lineman and needed a tackle as opposed to an edge. So he's the 4th defensive tackle going off the board. The Bills, they really need help stopping the run, so it makes sense getting a lineman here. So they take Walter Nolan. They could equally take Harmon here, whichever one falls. There are a couple of other guys that are kind of sitting on the edge of possibility of going in the first round here. I didn't include any of them, but I've had Alfred Collins going to them previously because he is a big run stuffer. But I think in my next mock, I'll probably have it being a little bit different. Nolan is very much a love-hate proposition. He could easily go in the top kind of 16. I've had him to the Cardinals previously, or he could miss out in the first round entirely. Josh Connolly, someone I haven't had in any of my mocks, but the Chiefs are highly likely to take an O-lineman. I think it's got to be someone who can play tackle, which is why I've gone for Connolly over Booker. And Connolly is considered, according to the odds, more likely to go in the first round. I spelled his name with two N's the second time, sorry. So O-line's probably likely, but you could also see them going D-line. They're definitely going to attack the trenches here in some way. And Connolly is likely to go in the first round, though I wouldn't say heavily likely. I'd say he's a good chance of going somewhere in the first round. And finally, Malaki Starks. There's no way he's going to get to 32, I don't think, even though I've seen him mocked here. It's just that Philly is the second most likely team to take a safety of the teams where it kind of made sense for me to give them a safety. So Starks is going at 32. I do think he probably goes earlier, highly likely to go somewhere in the first round. You can't get odds better than -400 of Starks going in the first round or of having less than two safeties in the first round. So more than two or more safeties in the first round. So this is likely to happen somewhere, but I think probably the Eagles go D-line. Who would they have taken here? Well, let's look at our notable exceptions and a couple of big names missing out, and none of them were D-linemen. Is there another edge rusher they could have taken in this situation? Not really. JT Tuimoloau, maybe, I think would have made sense. But yeah, with how it fell, I do think they probably would have gone elsewhere anyway. I think the big surprise here is that it was really hard to fit Egbuka and Burden in. I think we know they're probably going to go somewhere, Egbuka in particular. He's considered likely to go somewhere in the top 28, and it's heavily likely that we'll see at least three wide receivers going in the first round. It's just hard to know where exactly they'll go, but I think Egbuka slides in there somewhere. Luther Burden's a real possibility as well. Potentially to the Commanders, I think it's a possibility. Maybe the Rams would make sense. Not out of the question someone will trade up late into the first round to grab either of these guys. But yeah, this will be very interesting to see what happens with Egbuka and Burden. Tyler Booker's someone I've had as high as top 12, I think, at times. But it is hard to fit a guard in there somewhere. So I've got him falling a little bit. I still think he's highly likely to go in the first round. The bookies agree. Just not as likely to some other players. We are expecting there'll be at least 6 O-linemen going in the first round. And as you'll see, I believe I had 5. I believe I had Campbell and then Membu and, of course, Banks. And then I had Zabel and then I had Simmons and Connolly. Oh, I did have 6. So that is very likely to happen. But I think Booker probably comes in as a possibility instead of Connolly. The combination of Simmons, Connolly, and Booker, I think we probably see 2 of those guys because I think Zabel's looking more like a lock at the moment. And finally, Maxwell Hairston, very speedy cornerback, ran an insane time at the combine. He's kind of 50-50 to go in the first round. We are expecting there'll probably be 4 or less cornerbacks in the first round, but I only selected 2. So I of course had Johnson and Barron. I guess I had Hunter, so I did have 3 because they are considering Hunter to be a cornerback, even though I think he'll be selected as a wide receiver. So for that reason, I think that Hairston probably slides in there somewhere, but not entirely sure on that. Hard to see where. I think I've seen him go to the Bills quite a few mocks, for example, but I think it's a real chance he's somewhere in this range here, just before or after the end of the first round. Who surprised you? Who do you think should be in there? Where did the bookmakers get us on? Get it wrong? Let us know. Have a look at my mock as well if you want to know what I think is actually going to happen. I will be bringing out a new mock in the coming days. You can also hit us up on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down and on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with No-O. I answer all of your questions over there. So if you've got any questions or thoughts, hit me up on my socials. Of course, it'd be great if you could like and subscribe. We'll have heaps more NFL draft stuff coming up. And then, of course, we get into fantasy season, which is my main gig, of course. And we'll be talking about a heap of fantasy football moving forward. You can also check out the website over at ffdfantasyfootball.com. Look forward to chatting to you guys in a couple of days when I've got my next mock draft coming up. I will see you guys then.